Hey, everyone, thanks for tuning in today. We're going to take a look at this pretty major earthquake that hit Myanmar just a couple of days ago on March 28th. It was a big one, 7.7 magnitude. And, we're going to go through what caused it and the impact because, these kinds of events, they're really important to understand, especially for those of you preparing for the UPSC exams. This is definitely something that, you might see come up. So we're drawing on some reports that we've been reading in the Indian Express and the Hindu just to give you a well-rounded view. And right off the bat, the initial reports, they're painting a pretty serious picture. The buildings collapsing in Mandalay. And even in Bangkok, a skyscraper that was under construction actually collapsed. Wow, this was the strongest earthquake worldwide in 2 years. And, you've got to think about the aftershocks and all of that. So that's a lot of energy, a lot of power.
Yeah.
So where did all of this come from?
Yeah, so it really all comes down to the Earth, the basics of how our planet works. You've got the Earth's outer layer, the lithosphere. It's made up of these huge sections, these plates, and they're constantly moving and shifting and bumping into each other. It's all pretty dynamic, and when they get stuck and then suddenly release all that built-up energy, well, that's an earthquake. And those vibrations, that's what we feel as the shaking.
Right. And from what I'm reading, it seems like the epicenter of this earthquake was in a very specific spot in Myanmar.
Yeah, that's right. The reports are pointing to the Sagaing Fault, which is a major fault line running north to south. And it's basically where the Indian plate is pushing up against the Eurasian plate. So there's a lot of pressure there. And in this case, it was a strike slip movement. So imagine like two blocks sliding past each other horizontally.
So for our listeners out there who are preparing for the UPSC exams, it's important to not just understand what happened, but also the historical context.
Yeah.
Is Myanmar prone to earthquakes?
Oh, absolutely. Myanmar sits right along the Sagaing Fault, so it's definitely an earthquake-prone area. If we look back at the data from the USGS, you can see there have been at least 6 earthquakes that were magnitude 7 or greater since 1900. We had one in 1990 that was a magnitude 7. There was an even stronger one in 1912 south of this recent epicenter that was a 7.9. And then another one fairly recently in 2016, a magnitude 6.9. So there's definitely a pattern here. And if you go even further back in time, there was this massive earthquake in 1839, estimated to be about an 8.3. So yeah, this area has a history.
Wow. So even with all that history, this 2025 earthquake is still significant.
Oh, yeah. It's likely the strongest earthquake to hit mainland Myanmar in something like 75 years. And, even though there have been other strong earthquakes in the past, this one at a 7.7 magnitude, well, that's something to take note of. But the other thing is the depth. The epicenter of this earthquake was only about 10 kilometers below the surface. It's pretty shallow.
And why does that matter, the depth?
Yeah. Well, think about it like this. When an earthquake happens at a shallow depth, those powerful seismic waves, they don't have to travel through as much rock to get to the surface, which means they don't lose as much energy. So you get much more intense shaking right above the fault and in the surrounding area. And unfortunately, that means more damage to structures and, those waves travel outward. You've got to remember, it's not just the point right above the epicenter, it's the entire fault rupture.
Which brings us to this issue of preparedness and vulnerability. I mean, the USGS has put out some estimates of the potential casualties and economic losses, and they're pretty high.
They are, yeah, and it's a wide range, but the USGS is saying there could be anywhere from 10,000 to 100,000 fatalities, and the economic losses could reach up to 70% of Myanmar's GDP. That's huge, and it really raises the question, why such a potentially high impact? Well, it seems like one of the biggest factors is that there haven't been any major earthquakes in this particular area of Myanmar since 1956, so there's probably been less of a focus on earthquake preparedness, infrastructure, especially in densely populated places like Mandalay. It might not be built to withstand that kind of shaking.
So it almost sounds like there's a geographical element to this, like maybe some areas were just more prepared than others.
Exactly. If you look back at the historical earthquakes in Myanmar, a lot of them happened west of the Sagaing Fault. So this central region might not have been as aware or as prepared for a major earthquake hitting them directly.
So to sum it up for our listeners who are prepping for the UPSC exams, this earthquake was caused by movement along the Sagaing Fault, which has a history of seismic activity. The shallow depth of the earthquake unfortunately made shaking a lot worse. And the fact that there haven't been major earthquakes in this particular region for quite some time probably means that they weren't as prepared as they could have been. So understanding all of these things, the geology, the history, the impact of shallow earthquakes, and the importance of being prepared, well, that's all key for, your studies in disaster management and geography.
And it also brings up a really important question for everyone to think about. Given the history of earthquakes in this region and the risks, what can we learn from this globally How should we be designing and building cities and earthquake zones to make them more resilient to these kinds of disasters?
Absolutely something for us all to think about, and for all our listeners out there. If you found this deep dive helpful, please like and subscribe, and feel free to leave a comment with any questions or anything you'd like to add. And just a reminder, we pulled our information for this discussion mainly from reports in the Indian Express and the Hindu. Thanks for listening.